So you want the perfect setup for recording a dance recital. I'm going to walk you through that and how to avoid bad situations where something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, I'm going to tell you what to do in those situations. But come along, I'll show you my setup. I'll show you what made me choose the cameras and equipment, and then we'll go from there. If you're new to this channel, definitely consider subscribing. My name is Magnus. I like to talk about DSLR and mirrorless cameras specifically for video, but today I'm going to talk about filming specifically dance recitals, but this can go for many stage productions anyway. I've been doing that for over 10 years on and off, and it's a great time. And I'm going to show you my current setup for when I record dance recitals, which I just recorded one not too long ago. And I figured this would be the perfect time to show you my setup, why I do what I do, and then go from there. Now I've got the whole setup already ready, set up behind me, and I'm going to tell you why I chose what I chose. And I have like a spare camera so I can actually get behind me and like show you exactly what I have and what I'm doing to do it. So let's get started without any further delay. Okay, when it comes to choosing cameras, I'm using the Canon R5 Mark II to record. And on the floor here, I've got on a monopod the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. So two different camera models. Now, why did I choose these two cameras? Now, for this main shot, I chose this camera because this camera is one that's reliable and it has no recording limit, so I can record longer shows, and recording limits really matter. So when you're recording these longer shows, you want to avoid recording limits, but it's okay if you have a recording limit. A good way to work around this is to work with the producer of the show to know how long the particular pieces are, or if it's one long show, no breaks, you might want to actually work on some alternatives. But another thing that matters when you're making your selection is the lens choice. Now on this, I've got the Canon 16mm f2.8 lens, and then I have a 24-70 on this lens. Now, the reason that I chose this for the particular dance shows that I recorded recently is because I'm actually right in front of the students. Like the stage is right in front of me, which is why I needed as wide as possible, but affordable. So the 16mm f2.8 RF lens is actually very affordable for the RF mounts. But one of the most important things is finding out how far you are from the stage so that you can make the right selections, especially if you're doing a multi-camera setup where you want to have two different angles and you're doing it by yourself. Get different lens sizes. So I got the 24-70, but I'm having that at 24mm because at 24mm, it's a little bit more zoomed in, but I can still get as much of the dancers as possible. And then the 16mm is just for everything. So I can get the whole performance and I don't have to touch that camera. And I call one zoom, even though it's 24mm and it's still kind of wide, and one at 16mm, which is totally wide. But if the stage is farther, then you got to adapt. The important thing that I keep in mind is give a lens that can give the whole performance without you touching it, and then get one that is preferably a zoom lens where you can actually get the whole performance, or zoom in even closer if it's like a single dancer and get you their full body without any distractions at all, which would help when it comes to performances. Now, the cameras don't matter as much when it comes to sensor size. Actually shooting performances with smaller sensors is okay. If you do full frame, that's okay. It lets in more light. But I do want to show you some settings that I would use because the cameras I chose are both full frame. So these are instructions for full frame. Should there be smaller sensors, you have to do a little bit of math, and I'll try to talk you through it a little bit. Now, on the Canon R5, I'm going to show you the settings. Now, because the presentation is right in front of me, that's why I have the 16mm, but it doesn't matter how far they are from you. One of the things that happens a lot with dance recitals or with presentations on stage is that the lighting can be very, very different. What you want to do is make sure that you're using a log picture profile. Now, in the Canon R5 Mark II, I've got the ability to use Canon Log 2, which is how I've got it set up. So when I record this way, I'm able to get the best dynamic range, because in a lot of shows and presentations, You'll have bright parts in the stage and dark parts in the stage. Now, if you don't have a log profile in your camera, you can try to see if you have the ability to reduce contrast and reduce saturation just a little bit and make the footage softer. That way it could potentially almost like fake a log and then really get as much dynamic range as your camera can possibly squeeze in. I'm using the Samsung NX1 right now, and this does not have a log profile. And I've recorded dance recitals with this camera, but I've done so by reducing those settings, decreasing the sharpness as well. Sharpness, contrast, and saturation just a tad, and I've been able to get some great footage in dance recitals with this camera as well. And this camera came out in 2014. So yeah, one of the things that's also important too is the ability to get all of the dancers or all of the performers in focus, because you want to make sure that everyone's in focus and not just one dancer. Because this is a full frame camera, I actually reduced the f-stop to f11. I will keep the shutter speed at 1/50th, and I'll record at 24 frames per second in 8K. And the reason I record in 8K is because I want everything to be as picture perfect as possible for emergencies. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, ISO, I will, on this camera, put it up to 12,800, particularly for the dance recital that I record. Now, that preference may vary depending on the lighting situation that you have in your particular dance recital. But the logic is, if I'm recording a dance recital, I need to make sure that everyone's in focus. I can't change my shutter speed, so I'm going to accommodate for the low light with just increasing the ISO. Yes, it introduces noise, but that doesn't matter. You need to make sure that everyone's in focus and worry about the noise later. Right now, record, record, record. Now, when it comes to white balance, for these particular shows that I record, I keep it on tungsten, but adjusting white balance sometimes can be difficult because you're adjusting for the colors of the show. Now, many shows and many dance recitals have different colors that will put in at different times. You're watching it, but your camera is going to be confused by those colors. The most important thing is set a white balance, preferably custom white balance that your camera can do while there's nothing going on in the show. Make sure all your cameras match that color, is basically what you're looking at. And then go from there. And when things are changing in the show, do not change your white balance, because that's going to be terrible in post. And do not use auto white balance. Let's go from there. Now, when it comes to recording mode, like I said, I'm recording in 8K, but try to be as compressed as you possibly can. Many shows go on for a long amount of time. Now, you want to make sure that you have enough space in your memory card. As you can see, I have over an hour here. And that's great for 8K recording, but if your show is longer, you have little wiggle room. And that's why bring multiple memory cards. Now, here I've got two memory cards, a CF Express memory card and an SD memory card, and make sure that your camera can record to both. Having more than one memory card slot and adjusting to that slot to make sure that your recording modes actually can record in both cards without limitation is very important. Now, when it comes to recording modes, having more than one memory card, I've got two memory cards in here, helps when it comes to the recording modes. That way, you don't run out of storage, but make sure you have enough, and then make sure you have a backup whenever necessary, because that stuff is very important. Moving on. Now, I spoke about the f-stop going down to f11 on a full frame. But when it comes to something smaller size, like for example, APS-C, maybe going down to like f7 would give you the same amount of things in focus. A micro four thirds, maybe like f5.6. The smaller your sensor, the less you close your aperture, because you're still getting a similar amount of things in focus. One thing though to keep in mind, okay, that helps with that, but then when it comes to ISO and noise levels, like I talked about adjusting, ISO tends to be noisier and tends to be more prevalent in lower levels when you're using a smaller sensor. So if you've got a micro four thirds sensor, don't think that you could pull it to 12,800 like I did without getting a lot of noise. However, It's okay. The most important thing is that you get your shot well exposed, and if you have noise, you can deal with it later. Now let's continue on. We've got the cameras, we've got the lenses, we've got the setup, but let's go over everything else and see what else we got to figure out in this complicated setup I've got going on here. Now, when it comes to accessories, there's a ton of stuff going on here in this whole setup. First, let's start with audio. Now, audio, I've got a Rode VideoMic Pro hooked up. Now, when you have this audio, it's much better than camera audio. You'll get a lot of bass. So always keep in mind that hooking up a microphone is your best bet when it comes to getting audio for these presentations. You could also set up external audio as long as you connect it into the mic jack of the camera or an external recorder, and then set it up even closer to the stage, which would be awesome. But I've also got in my setup on my Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K, which is sitting on the floor, the actual preamps and the microphones on that camera are so good that it actually competes with external microphones. So I don't put an external microphone on it. The other thing that I keep in mind as well is that some cameras have the ability to record more than one channel of audio. So when it comes to this particular microphone, not only do I got built-in microphone, but I have external microphone and recording level settings. What I tend to do is put both at 2 different volume levels. So on one recording level, it's kind of on the lower side, and on the built-in microphone, for example, it's on the higher side. This makes sense because if some performances are lower, I have a microphone that's actually boosted a bit so you can hear them, or as common with shows, things get loud, I'm recording at such a low level that it won't peak out in my audio levels and I capture everything. I do these settings in both this camera and on the Blackmagic it's on the floor, because when I do that, I have the ability to not worry about it in post. Another thing to keep in mind is that I have, via HDMI, I have it hooked up to an external recorder. Now, this external recorder is important because we've got to talk about failures. If this camera fills up the memory card, if the memory card fails, if anything happens, I've got a backup that's recording with an SSD with this Atomos Ninja recorder. This is my main shot that I don't move, so having a backup that's recorded externally has saved me more than once. Now, it's got an in and out, and on that out, it goes to this external HDMI broadcaster from Xune, and this thing is amazing because when I use this, I'm able to transmit HDMI video from the recorder straight to the dancers, so backstage, they can watch all the performances so that they don't have to wonder what's going on and when they're on next. So it's pretty cool. And one of the most important things, besides memory cards and having enough memory cards and having backup, is power. A lot of these performances tend to be on the longer side, and you want to make sure that you're prepped. Now, the obvious thing is, of course, getting backup batteries. One tip that I will give you is keep at least 1 or 2 backup batteries for each camera in your pocket. Worst case scenario, should you need them. And I've got one not only for each of the cameras, but also for the external recorder as well, should things happen. Because sometimes things fail, but usually it's not everything all at once. So when it comes to longer performances, you don't always have the ability to record and switch your batteries when you're in the middle of recording. It just doesn't work out. For many cameras, you have the ability to plug in via USB-C and get power delivery there. And some external recorders also come with plugs so that you can actually plug it in rather than using a battery. I highly recommend that. This also has the ability to get plugged in as well. Highly recommend. Don't use batteries. However, because I know this uses low power, I'm fine for like a couple of hours, even with these smaller Sony batteries. Now, everything that I use is plugged in. Now, V-mount batteries, a lot of people have used and they're pretty good. And you get pretty comparable prices, $150, $130, somewhere like $60, $70. But what mattered to me is long performance and affordability as well. So I actually bought this not too long ago, this little power station that's meant for camping, right? And it cost about $120 on Amazon. I unfortunately I won't leave a link because they don't sell it anymore, but you can find a ton on Amazon. They had two regular power plugs, and then it had USB connections too, and then a USB-C connection, and it has 80,000 milliamp hours, and that's why I got it, because I'm not moving when it comes to filming these performances. But what did matter to me is the longevity of the shoots. So 80,000 milliamp hours, it's much more that you'll get when compared to something like a V-mount battery with like limited plugs and a lot less milliamp hours. And sure, it's easier to run and gun with that compared to what I had here, but I'm not going anywhere. So having something like that, and that would even bring some extension cords, and it has a hell of a power output, and it saves money. So I use that, and having your own ability to plug in while you're recording is so much better than depending on batteries alone. And then when they run out and you got to switch batteries, you can miss critical footage. And finally, I want to talk to you about certain scenarios that have happened when things have gone wrong during these shoots, and what I do to quickly solve those problems and still get all the footage that's necessary. So here's one story. One time I'm recording, and the alternative camera, which is the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K full frame, it stopped recording. Now, the R5 Mark II was recording, the Atomos was recording, but this stopped recording, and that's my zoom angle. Now, here's what I did to solve that problem. It stopped recording because the hard drive was full. I had a CF Express card in the camera, so because I had a spare card, all I did was unplug the hard drive so it can record off the CF Express card and then hit record again. That's great, but what about the missing footage? Well, that's why I had the R5 Mark II recording in 8K, because in post, I can actually crop the footage, zoom in a little bit, and it actually looks like a zoom angle. And that's why I recorded 8K, so I don't lose that quality. And I can still maintain the quality of the footage and have the backup here. Now, another scenario that happened, this thing was getting too close to overheating before I installed a fan, which I have here, and this fan helped a lot when it comes to overheating scenarios. I just plug in a power delivery here and have the fan, and then I can last a lot longer. In fact, I've never actually overheated this camera to begin with. Before I had this fan, I was a little nervous about overheating. So what I did was I stopped recording for a little bit, but I had a backup. And the backup continued to record, and I didn't miss any footage. So that was amazing as well. And even when the camera stops recording because the space is full, and I need to switch cameras, I still have the ability to record a backup. And that's absolutely important when it comes to filming these things. Now, another scenario that's happened that's made me panic is that there was one time a presentation was so long, the battery pack itself stopped recording. Well, what that caused is that because I had this thing plugged in, it shut off. However, the cameras themselves, because they're plugged in USB-C, it's better via USB-C because when you lose power off the USB-C, it'll use the internal battery and it'll still keep recording. Same goes for the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K full frame. After it lost power off of the main power delivery, it had a battery inserted inside and it was still able to finish recording. At that point, I have backup batteries in my pocket and I can make sure that I can still continue recording and then figure out what's going on with the power there. So there's always a solution. And then finally, for my last tip, when you're running out of memory card space and your second spare doesn't have enough and you know you're going to go on for longer, what I've done is actually switch the recording roll from 8K to 4K. And then when I switched to 4K, now we got 4 hours instead of the 1 hour that I had with 8K. So when desperate times call for desperate measures, you use those to your advantage and you make adjustments on the fly. And I would make these changes in between performances so that I could avoid more difficult scenarios. That's basically it when it comes to my setup and tips as to what are the best settings for dance performances. If you got any other tips, definitely share. I hope this stuff helped you and I got direct to the point. And of course, if you want to see more content, like I love to talk about cameras and setups like this, definitely consider subscribing. As always, you can make my day when you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. Got a lot of cleaning up to do. See you guys later.